It was December 20th, and I stood at the kitchen counter separating eggs, the smell of flour filling the air. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts, and I glanced at the screen. It was a message from my daughter-in-law, Britney. "We're not celebrating Christmas with you this year. We don't need you." I stared at it for a long moment, my hands frozen in place. Not because I didn't believe she could say it, I knew her too well by now, but because, as I read it, I could practically hear her voice in my head. Bright, smug, and sure that I'd do what I always did: apologize for existing, offer money, and beg for another chance to be tolerated. I was done with that. I'm Flo Mercer, 72 years old, and I'd been the one who made Christmas happen for my son Kyle and his wife year after year. The flights, the groceries, the gifts, the last-minute emergencies. "Mom, we're short again. Can you cover it just this once?" I didn't even bat an eyelash anymore. I didn't say no because I was afraid that if I did, they'd stop calling altogether. But looking back, I started to see the pattern. And it wasn't about love. It wasn't even about family. It was about control. I took a deep breath, forcing a smile, and then I typed out one word: cool. But I didn't stop there. I added one more line that I knew would make her heart skip a beat. "Then tomorrow's signing is canceled, and my attorney is freezing every account you've been using." I set my phone down, face down. I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want to think about what would come next, but I knew I had to. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. Now, before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. And what time is it where you are? I'm curious how far these stories travel. While you're down there, hit that like button if you've ever felt used by someone who is supposed to love you. And if you want to hear how this played out, make sure you subscribe because this story gets wild. The next day, I woke up to a flurry of missed calls, mostly from Kyle and Britney. But I didn't pick up. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down at my kitchen table. I opened the folder I'd been building for weeks: bank statements, credit card records, screenshots of texts, receipts from Christmases past. Frank always told me, paper doesn't lie. People do. And I was starting to realize how true that was. I wasn't going to be the mother who kept pretending everything was fine. I wasn't going to be the one who sacrificed her own peace just to keep everyone else happy. And as I sat there, flipping through the documents, one thing became painfully clear. Christmas hadn't been a holiday in my family for a long time. It had been a transaction, and I had been the one paying the price. How many of you have ever been in a situation where you've given and given, only to realize the people you love are taking more than they ever give back? It's a painful realization, isn't it? Drop your thoughts below, because I want to hear your stories. Now, I'll take you back to how it all started. The first Christmas after Frank passed, Kyle called me in early November. His voice was careful, like he was stepping around broken glass. "Mom, I know this year's hard for you. Britney and I were thinking maybe we could host Christmas, give you a break. You shouldn't have to cook and plan everything alone." I was drowning in grief, and the thought of not having to carry the weight of the holiday felt like mercy. So I said yes. 2 weeks later, Kyle called again. "Mom, quick question. The caterer needs a deposit. Can you cover it? We'll pay you back after Christmas." I didn't hesitate. I just sent the money. $800. I told myself it was a gift. That's what mothers do, right? But they never paid me back. The next year, it was the flights. "Mom, tickets are crazy expensive this year. Can you book ours? We'll Venmo you." The Venmo never came. The year after that, it was the gifts. "Mom, we're a little tight this month. Can you grab a few things for the kids? Just this once." Just this once became every single time. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being a mother they wanted to see. I became the budget line that made their version of Christmas possible. And I stayed quiet. I kept writing checks because I was terrified that if I didn't, they wouldn't call again. But it wasn't just the money that hurt. It was the guilt. The guilt they wrapped around every request. "Mom, everyone else's parents help out. Don't you want your grandkids to have a good Christmas?" It wasn't just the money. It was how they made me feel like I was nothing more than a bank account. And then I saw the charges. I saw the purchases I didn't recognize. I didn't accuse them. I didn't confront them. I just started asking questions. Casual questions. I called Kyle. Hey, did you use my card for something? I'm seeing charges I don't recognize. Without hesitation, he said, Yeah, Mom. Britney put a few things on it. She was going to tell you. It's for Christmas. What things? I asked. Decor. Some gifts. A deposit. We're doing a bigger Christmas this year, remember? For the family. A bigger Christmas. That's what they called it when Britney wanted to impress people who didn't care about her. And that's when the quiet part of me, the part one used to ignore, finally stood up and whispered, if they're comfortable taking without asking now, they'll take more the moment they can. So, I did something I hadn't done in years. I didn't confront them. I didn't yell or scream. I watched. I started digging into my accounts, looking for every trace of unauthorized access. I met with my attorney, Mr. Harland, and that's when I found out exactly what they were trying to do. But this wasn't just about Christmas anymore. It wasn't even about the money. It was about my future, my security. And what I found next would change everything. Stay tuned for part 2. You won't want to miss it. The meeting with Mr. Harland had been a quiet revelation. I had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went. He sat across from me, steady, his gaze calm, as he sifted through the documents I'd brought in. It wasn't just the unauthorized charges. No, this was much bigger. He didn't sugarcoat it. Diane, he said slowly, someone has been trying to position themselves to control your finances. The words hit me harder than I'd expected. My throat went dry, and I struggled to keep my composure as he slid an email across the desk. It was from the lawyer Britney had recommended, the one who'd started showing up in our conversations like an invisible shadow. The subject line read, Guardianship Evaluation Checklist. The moment I read those words, I knew what was happening. They weren't just looking for help. They were preparing to take over. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. This wasn't about making Christmas easier. It wasn't about simplifying anything. It was about control, pure and simple. My stomach twisted as I thought back to all the times I'd brushed off my gut feelings, all the times I'd convinced myself I was overreacting. I had always believed that if I just played nice, if I kept giving, maybe one day they'd see me. Maybe one day they'd remember I wasn't just a resource. But it never happened. The worst part? I'd always made excuses for Kyle. He was my son. I had raised him. I loved him. But now I saw him differently. He wasn't just a victim of Britney's manipulation. He was complicit. He had helped her build this reality, where I was nothing more than a stepping stone to their convenience. I realized then that the man I thought I knew, my son, wasn't the man who stood before me anymore. He was someone else. And he was enabling her. Mr. Harland told me I needed to act. Fast. He laid out a plan. Cancel the signing that Kyle had been pushing for, remove his access to anything financial, document every single thing. Every text, every charge, every request. But the most important step, don't engage. I didn't even tell Kyle. That night, I felt a kind of peace I hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't joy. It was clarity. I was doing the right thing, even if it felt like I was breaking something that could never be fixed. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls. I didn't return a single one. Instead, I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and kept working on my plan. I called my bank, had my cards replaced, and set up alerts for unusual activity. Then I called Mr. Harland again just to make sure I was doing everything right. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew this was the point of no return. It was time to take control of my life again. Have you ever felt that moment of clarity where everything suddenly falls into place? It's terrifying but empowering at the same time. I want to hear about your moments of realization. Let's talk in the comments. By 9 a.m., I was sitting in my bank, doing exactly what I needed to do to protect myself. Kyle's name was removed from every account. I'd never done something like this before. The bank officer, Patricia was professional and supportive. She made sure every precaution was taken, setting up fraud alerts, changing the security questions, making sure I'd be notified of any suspicious activity. It felt like locking the doors of my house, not just for security, but because I finally felt safe. When I walked out of that bank, I felt free. That afternoon, Kyle called. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up. "Mom, what did you do?" His voice was tight, controlled. "I protected myself," I said calmly. "The bank just called me. They said my access was removed." "Why would you do that without talking to me first?" he asked. I almost laughed. "Kyle, when did you talk to me before you spent $4,000 on my card?" There was a silence, thick with tension. Then he said, "That's different." "No, it's not," I said. "I gave you access for groceries, not for boutique shopping and event deposits. And certainly not to fund a Christmas I wasn't even invited to." The line went quiet again. Then his voice softened, dangerously soft, as if he was testing the waters. "Mom, are you feeling okay?" I smiled at that, feeling a wave of satisfaction ripple through me. "I'm feeling fantastic. And I'm especially glad you asked because my attorney will be thrilled to hear you're already planting that story." That hit him hard. His tone shifted again. "Mom, please. We were just trying to make Christmas easier. Don't you want to be part of it?" I wasn't ready to engage in their guilt-tripping game. If you wanted me in your life, you wouldn't have texted me that you don't need me. You wouldn't have tried to use my money to create a perfect holiday for yourselves while excluding me from it. I could hear him breathe through the phone, the weight of the words settling between us. "Mom, we didn't mean it like that. It was just stress." "I've had enough of the excuses, Kyle," I said firmly. "You don't get to use me anymore. You don't get to use my money. I'm not a backup plan. I'm not your safety net." Then, without waiting for his response, I ended the call. It was done. But the real test was about to come. It didn't end there. What Britney and Kyle didn't expect was that the moment I stood my ground, everything changed. It wasn't just about money. It was about something much bigger. The power dynamic shifted, and that's when they came knocking. Stay tuned for part 3. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this plays out. The next morning, December 21st, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing again. I already knew who it was, Kyle. I didn't even bother checking the caller ID. Instead, I sipped my coffee, savoring the quiet in my house. It was a stillness I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was making my own choices, not reacting to anyone else's drama. But then I heard the sound of my doorbell camera buzzing on my phone. I opened the app and froze. There, standing on my porch, were Kyle and Britney. And behind them, a man in a suit. He wasn't just anyone. I didn't recognize him, but I recognized the look on his face, the same look people get when they think they can intimidate you into submission. He was a lawyer, and this was no coincidence. I watched them for a few moments, my finger hovering over the intercom button. They rang the doorbell again, harder this time. I could feel my pulse quicken, my breath shallow as I stood still, watching them from the safety of my living room. "Mom, we know you're home." "Open the door," Kyle's voice called out, his tone urgent, almost desperate. I could see Britney in the background, arms crossed tightly, her expression cold and calculating. But it was the lawyer, Richard, who stood there like a silent threat, as if his presence was meant to make me back down. I didn't open the door. Instead, I pressed the intercom button. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice clear but steady. Britney didn't waste a second. She snapped back. "We're coming in, Diane." I didn't flinch. "No, you're not," I said, my tone sharp, cutting through the air between us like a knife. Kyle's voice softened, but there was a thin layer of tension in it now. "Mom, please, we just want to talk. Can we do this face to face?" I shook my head, still standing in my living room, my eyes locked on the camera feed. "We're talking. And you can say whatever you need to say from where you're standing." The lawyer spoke up for the first time, his voice smooth, the kind of voice designed to make you believe he was on your side. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm Richard Calloway, an attorney," he said, tilting his head slightly toward the camera. Your son and daughter-in-law are concerned about your well-being and wanted me to come by to help. We need to talk to you. You've been making some troubling decisions lately. I almost laughed. It was the language of control, the language of someone who believed that they had the right to decide what was best for me. I don't need you to tell me what's best for me, I said, my voice steady. And I don't need you to come into my home uninvited. Mrs. Mercer, Richard continued, trying to sound reasonable, this isn't about you. It's about making sure you're safe, making sure you're being looked after. We're just trying to help. Help, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. You came here to intimidate me, to make me feel like I was the one who was wrong, didn't you? You thought that if you showed up with a lawyer, I'd crumble. But you're wrong. Richard's smile faltered, just for a second. He wasn't prepared for me to be so calm. Kyle tried again, his voice now strained. Mom, please. Can we just let this go? Let's talk this through. Don't make this harder than it has to be. And there it was, the manipulation, the soft tone that always came when Kyle wanted something.
But not this time.
This time, I wasn't buying it. Not anymore. You've already made this difficult, Kyle, I said, my voice low but firm. You try to take what's mine, and now you want me to let it go, to pretend that nothing happened?
No.
I'm done letting you use me as a safety net for your mistakes. You're going to have to figure this out on your own. There was a long silence. I watched them on my phone, the tension thick in the air. Kyle, looking lost, not sure what to do. Britney, standing tall, her face twisted in anger. But it was Richard who finally broke the silence, his voice still calm, but now laced with something else, frustration. You don't know what you're doing, Mrs. Mercer, he said. This is going to get ugly. You're cutting yourself off from your family. You're pushing them away. This is not the way to handle this. I took a deep breath, my mind clear. You want me to feel guilty, don't you? To doubt myself. To think that I'm doing something wrong. But I'm not the one who's wrong here. I didn't ask for any of this. You're the ones who showed up at my door, and now you're trying to make me look like the villain. That's not happening. And then, without giving them a chance to speak again, I hit the intercom button to end the conversation. I stood there for a moment, my chest rising and falling as I collected myself. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I didn't feel like I was losing a battle. I felt like I was finally standing my ground, and I wasn't backing down. Have you ever had someone try to manipulate you, to make you feel like you were in the wrong when you knew you were just protecting yourself? Tell me in the comments. How did you handle it? And if you've ever had to stand up to someone who took advantage of your kindness, you're not alone. We're all in this together. And just as I thought I could take a breath, it happened. Kyle and Britney didn't go away quietly. No, they escalated. They filed a report with Adult Protective Services, claiming I was incapable of managing my own life. I didn't know it at the time, but this was only the beginning of what they were planning. Stay tuned for part 4, where things get even more intense. You won't believe what happens when they try to take this fight to the next level. You won't want to miss it. It started with a phone call. At exactly 3:15 p.m., my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize flashing on the screen. I hesitated for only a second before answering. My gut told me this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. Hello, Mrs. Mercer. A woman's voice said, calm and professional. This is Sandra Pute from Adult Protective Services. I'm calling because we received a report of concern regarding your welfare. I'd like to schedule a time to meet with you and conduct a wellness check. My stomach dropped. I knew who had filed that report. Britney and Kyle. They were trying to paint me as a confused, vulnerable old woman who couldn't take care of herself. They thought a caseworker would come to my door, see a frail lady, and immediately decide I needed their help, their control.
But what they didn't know.
I had been preparing for this moment for weeks. I wasn't going to let them rewrite my story. I took a deep breath and replied, my voice steady. A wellness check? Of course. When would you like to meet? Sandra's tone softened, but there was an edge of professionalism to it. Would tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock work for you? Perfect, I said, nodding even though she couldn't see me. I'll be home. As soon as I hung up, a cold wave of reality hit me. They were escalating, and now it wasn't just about money. It was about control, and it was about my dignity. I wasn't going to let them make me the villain in their narrative. Have you ever had someone try to take control of your life, your decisions, or your freedom? It's one of the hardest things to go through, especially when it's from someone you love. If you've dealt with anything similar, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment and share your story. Let's stand together in this. That night, I didn't sleep much. I was too busy preparing. I cleaned my kitchen until it sparkled, not because I was worried about what Sandra might think, but because I wanted my space to reflect the truth of who I was, a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. I organized the documents on my dining room table: bank statements, screenshots of text messages, the police report from when they'd showed up at my door with that lawyer, the email about the guardianship checklist. I had it all. The next morning, I dressed carefully, choosing a simple outfit. No frills, just something that said, "I'm in control." I brushed my hair, put on my glasses, and walked into the kitchen, where I set out the coffee mugs, preparing to face whatever came next. At 9:45, I sat down, my heart pounding in my chest. The knock at my door came at exactly 10 o'clock, just like they said. Sandra Pute stood on my doorstep, looking every bit the professional. She was in her early 40s, wearing a lanyard with her credentials clearly visible. I knew she had a job to do, but I also knew she wasn't prepared for what she was about to see. "Mrs. Mercer?" she asked with a polite smile, her eyes scanning the surroundings as if looking for signs of neglect. "Yes, come in," I said, stepping aside. I didn't need to explain myself to her. I just needed her to see the truth. We sat at the dining room table, the sunlight streaming in through the windows, illuminating the folders I had prepared. I offered her coffee, and we spoke for a while, about the charges I had found on my credit card, about the text message from Britney that had opened my eyes, about the police report I'd filed. I showed her everything. When I opened the folder with the guardianship checklist, Sandra raised an eyebrow. Her interest piqued. "These are the documents your family had you sign?" she asked, flipping through them. "They wanted me to sign them. But after seeing that email, I knew they were trying to take control." I replied calmly. Sandra nodded slowly. "And this is when you made the decision to cancel the meeting with your attorney?" "Yes," I said, because I realized it wasn't just about paperwork. It was about stripping me of my rights. And I wasn't going to let that happen. Sandra studied everything with quiet focus, her eyes flicking from one document to another. She was sharp, and I could see the gears turning in her mind as she pieced it all together. "I can see you've been very organized and thorough," she said, setting her pen down. "Mrs. Mercer, I've gone through the report, the documents, and everything you've shown me. And based on what I'm seeing here today, I have to say, you're right to be concerned." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Not because I expected her to take my side. I had no doubt she would do her job professionally, but because she wasn't swayed by the manipulative tactics Kyle and Britney had used. She saw me for what I was, a woman protecting herself. Sandra paused, looking directly at me. "There are clear signs of financial exploitation here. You've done everything by the book, and it's clear you're fully capable of managing your affairs." I felt a tear prick at the corner of my eye, but I quickly blinked it away. This was the validation I needed. Not from a lawyer, not from Kyle or Britney, but from someone who could see the situation for what it truly was. "I'm going to close this case as unfounded," Sandra continued. "But I'll also make sure that the attempted financial exploitation is properly documented. If you need further help, if this escalates in any way, don't hesitate to reach out. You're not alone in this." I exhaled, my chest feeling lighter than it had in months. It was over. The truth was finally out there, in the open, for everyone to see. But I knew this wasn't the end. It wasn't just about this report. No, this was about the fight I had been avoiding for so long, the fight for my autonomy, my dignity, my ability to say no without feeling guilty. The worst was yet to come, but I was ready. Stay tuned for the final part of the story, where I face the consequences of standing up for myself and learn just how far people will go when they think they've lost control. You don't want to miss it. The relief I felt that day, sitting across from Sandra, was fleeting. The moment she left, I knew that the battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. My heart was still racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Britney and Kyle weren't going to let this go. They were about to escalate, and I needed to be ready. I spent the rest of the day feeling like I was walking on eggshells. There was a strange quiet in my house, a stillness I hadn't felt in ages. It was the kind of peace that comes after a storm, before you hear the distant rumblings of thunder on the horizon. My mind kept replaying the events of the last few weeks, the manipulative texts, the sudden charges on my credit card, the way Kyle and Britney had shown up with that lawyer. I had finally taken control, but I knew they weren't going to let me walk away so easily. By 4:30 p.m., I received another phone call. This time, it wasn't from Kyle or Britney, but from Mr. Harland. "Diane," he said, his voice sharp, "I just got notification. Britney's attorney filed something this morning." My stomach dropped. I could already feel the weight of what was coming. "Filed what?" I asked. Even though I already had a sinking feeling, I knew the answer. "A petition for emergency guardianship," he replied, his tone steady but laced with concern. "They're claiming you're a danger to yourself due to diminished capacity and recent erratic behavior." I felt the world tilt beneath me. The walls closed in as I tried to process what he was saying. This was it. This was what I'd feared. The moment they would try to strip me of my rights in the most official way possible. They were doing exactly what I'd suspected they would. They had used the welfare check to prepare the ground, and now they were trying to have me declared incapable. How do they even do that? I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to remain calm. "They file a petition, Diane," Mr. Harland explained. "But with the evidence we have, everything you've been documenting, we'll fight it in court. They won't win." I couldn't stop the tears that sprang to my eyes. Not because I was afraid, but because this was my son, the man I had raised, and he was allowing all of this to happen. My son was now part of a plan to take control of my life, and I had to fight him, had to fight for what was mine. "Mr. Harland," I said, my voice firm, "when is the hearing?" He paused for a moment before responding. "It's set for December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas." Have you ever found yourself in a situation where the people you love most turned against you? It's one of the hardest things I've ever had to face. But standing your ground and protecting your peace isn't a mistake. It's necessary. If you've been in a similar situation, drop a comment. You're not alone, and your strength is more powerful than you know. 2 days before Christmas. I spent that night in a haze, the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on me. I couldn't sleep. All I could think about was how things had spiraled so quickly. All these years, I had tried to be a good mother, a generous mother. I had given everything to my son and his wife, hoping that they would see me. But they didn't. They only saw what I could provide. The hearing came too quickly. I dressed carefully that morning. The navy blue suit Frank had always said made me look professional. I didn't feel professional, though. I felt like a woman who had been dragged into a battle she never wanted to fight. But I had no choice now. This was my life, my future, and I was going to fight for it. Mr. Harland picked me up at 8:15 a.m. We didn't speak much during the drive to the courthouse. He had briefed me twice on what to expect, but it didn't make it any easier. I was about to stand in front of a judge and defend my right to make my own decisions. I wasn't just fighting for my assets anymore. I was fighting for my dignity, my identity. I was fighting for my right to exist on my own terms. When we arrived, the courtroom felt cold, impersonal. The wood paneling, the bright fluorescent lights, it all made me feel small. But I wasn't small. Not anymore. At exactly 9 a.m., the bailiff called the room to order. "All rise." The Honorable Judge Patricia Brennan presiding. Judge Brennan, an older woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, looked at both sides of the courtroom. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She opened the file in front of her and got straight to business. "This is an emergency hearing regarding a petition for guardianship filed by Britney Mercer on behalf of Diane Mercer," she said, her voice steady. "I've reviewed the petition and the opposition. Mr. Calloway, you filed the petition. Proceed." Richard Calloway stood up, his voice practiced and smooth. He was trying to paint me as an unfit mother, as a woman whose mental state had deteriorated. I could see the words on the tip of his tongue, the language he had been trained to use. "Your Honor," he began, "my client Brittany Mercer is deeply concerned about her mother-in-law, Diane Mercer. Over the past several weeks, Mrs. Mercer has exhibited troubling behavior. She's isolated herself from her family. She's made sudden, irrational financial decisions. She's refused help from loved ones who only want to ensure her safety and well-being." My heart sank as he spoke, but I held my ground. I didn't flinch. The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Mercer, please approach." I walked to the witness stand, my legs shaking but my resolve firm. As I took the oath, I glanced at Kyle for the first time since the hearing began. His face was pale, his eyes avoiding mine. He didn't look like the man I had raised. He looked like a stranger. "Mrs. Mercer," Judge Brennan began, her voice neutral, "can you tell me in your own words what's been happening?" I took a deep breath, my hands steady as I spoke. "Your Honor, on December 20th, my daughter-in-law sent me a text message. It said, 'We're not celebrating Christmas with you this year. We don't need you.' After I received that message, I made a decision to remove her and my son's access to my financial accounts because they had been using my credit card without permission." The judge nodded. "What kind of charges?" "Over $4,000. Boutique purchases, spa packages, event deposits. I had given my son access to one card for emergencies, but they used it for personal expenses without asking me." Judge Brennan turned to Britney. "Mrs. Mercer, you sent that text message on December 20th. Is that correct?" Britney stood, her posture stiff, her voice shaky as she spoke. "Yes, Your Honor, but it wasn't meant the way Diane is describing it. We were just trying to have a quieter Christmas. She's been so controlling about the holidays, and we needed space." The judge didn't let her off the hook. "You told a 72-year-old widow that you didn't need her, and you expected that to be received as a request for space?" Britney faltered, but Richard quickly jumped in. "Your Honor, the family was simply trying to protect Mrs. Mercer from making decisions that could harm her financially." Judge Brennan's expression hardened. "By ensuring she had support?" she asked. "By making decisions for her?" Then the judge turned back to me. "Mrs. Mercer, can you explain why you canceled the signing meeting with your attorney?" I spoke clearly, without hesitation. I was supposed to sign a document that would have given my son limited power of attorney. But when I saw that it included a clause allowing him to delegate that authority to his wife, I canceled it. I realized they were trying to take control of my finances. Judge Brennan didn't waste a second. "I'm denying the petition for guardianship," she said, her voice final. "Mrs. Mercer has clearly demonstrated capacity. The evidence suggests the concerns raised were not about her well-being, but about access to her assets." I felt a wave of relief crash over me. But the judge wasn't done. "Furthermore," she continued, "I'm granting Mrs. Mercer's request for a protective order. Brittany Mercer and Kyle Mercer are prohibited from contacting Mrs. Diane Mercer or coming within 500 feet of her residence for a period of 6 months." The courtroom went silent. I could feel all eyes on me, but I didn't care anymore. I had won. As I walked out of the courtroom, Kyle's eyes met mine for a brief moment. He looked like he was in pain, but I didn't feel sorry for him. Not anymore. "What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you fight for your right to be heard, even if it meant standing up to the people you loved most? Drop a comment and let me know what you do. And if you've ever had to fight for your freedom, share your story. Together, we're stronger." When I got home that day, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. I had stood up for myself. I had set the boundaries that should have been set long ago. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't afraid. But the battle wasn't over yet. Kyle and Brittany were still out there, and I knew they weren't done. But I was ready. I wasn't just fighting for my money or my house anymore. I was fighting for my right to exist without apology, without guilt, and without fear. And no one was going to take that from me.